On December 14, 1972, astronaut Gene Cernan climbed back into his lunar module, looked out over the surface of the moon one last time, and left. No human being has been back since. That was 53 years ago. More than half a century of silence between Earth and its nearest neighbor in space. But on April 1, 2026, a rocket carrying 4 astronauts launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida and flew around the moon. 10 days later, they splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. And just like that, humanity was back. This is the story of Artemis II, the crew that shattered records, the mission that almost did not happen, and the moment behind the moon that made the entire world cry. Let's get into it. So to understand why Artemis II matters so much, you need to understand the gap. The distance between Apollo 17 and Artemis II isn't just measured in years, it's measured in everything that happened in between. The Space Shuttle program came and went. The International Space Station was built piece by piece in low Earth orbit. SpaceX went from a garage startup to launching astronauts. We landed rovers on Mars. We took pictures of black holes. But nobody went back to the moon. Not Americans, not Russians, nobody. The Artemis program was NASA's answer to that, a multi-mission campaign designed to send humans back to the moon and eventually to Mars. Artemis I launched in November 2022 as an uncrewed test flight. The massive Space Launch System rocket sent the Orion capsule around the moon and back with no crew on board, just to prove the hardware worked. And it did, mostly. When engineers inspected the Orion capsule after splashdown, they found something alarming. The heat shield, the barrier between the crew and temperatures hot enough to melt steel, had eroded in more than 100 places. Chunks of the ablative coating had cracked and blown off during reentry. That discovery would haunt the Artemis program for years. But we'll come back to that. First, let's talk about the crew, because these 4 people are the reason this mission became more than just a technical achievement. Reid Wiseman was the commander, a 50-year-old Navy captain who flew F-14 Tomcats and tested F-35 fighter jets. He had already spent 165 days aboard the International Space Station and served as the head of NASA's astronaut office. On paper, he was the textbook choice to command the first crewed lunar mission in half a century. But Wiseman's story goes deeper than his resume. In May 2020, his wife Carol, a pediatric nurse, died of cancer at 46 years old. He was left to raise their 2 daughters alone while training for what would become the biggest mission in modern spaceflight history. Before launch, Wiseman told reporters he had walked his daughters through estate documents and contingency plans just in case something went wrong at the moon. And his girls, instead of being terrified, turned it into something positive. That is the kind of family that was behind this mission. Flying alongside Wiseman as pilot was Victor Glover, a 49-year-old Navy captain with 24 combat missions and over 3,000 flight hours across more than 40 different aircraft. Glover had already made history as part of SpaceX's first operational crew mission to the space station in 2020. But Artemis II made him the first black person to ever fly to the moon. When asked about that milestone, Glover consistently pushed back on making it about race alone. He framed it as human history, not black history. His crewmates called him Ike, short for I know everything, because the man apparently has a photographic memory. He carried a Bible and a family heirloom with him on the journey. Christina Koch served as mission specialist. She is an electrical engineer who spent a year working at the South Pole Research Station in temperatures cold enough to kill you in minutes. She held the record for the longest continuous space flight by a woman at 328 days aboard the space station. And on Artemis II, she became the first woman to ever travel beyond low Earth orbit. Think about that. 57 years after the Apollo program started sending humans to the moon, not a single woman had ever gone farther than the space station. Koch changed that. She also earned the nickname Space Plumber a few days into the mission when the Orion capsule's toilet malfunctioned and she was the one who fixed it. Legend. And then there was Jeremy Hansen, a Royal Canadian Air Force colonel and CF-18 fighter pilot who became the first Canadian and first non-American to ever travel beyond low Earth orbit. The wildest part about Hansen is that Artemis II was his first spaceflight, the man's first time leaving Earth, and he goes all the way to the moon. His personal mission patch was designed by an Anishinaabe artist, incorporating indigenous teachings, which felt like a perfect symbol of what this mission represented. Something new, something bigger than any one country. Together, these four rewrote the record books. First woman, first black person, first non-American, all on the same flight, all going farther from Earth than any human being has ever traveled. Now the story gets tense. The road to the launch pad was an absolute nightmare. After the Artemis I heat shield problem was identified, NASA spent over a year investigating. Engineers eventually traced the issue to the reformulated ablative coating material called AV coat. The original Apollo-era version of this material was designed to let gases escape through tiny pores during reentry, but the updated version used on Orion lacked that same permeability. During the extreme heat of the skip reentry maneuver, gases built up inside the hardened outer layer, created pressure, and blew chunks off the surface. NASA had two options: replace the entire heat shield, which would delay the mission by at least 18 months, or fly with the existing shield and change the re-entry angle to reduce the stress on the coating. They chose the second option. Engineers modified the trajectory from a pronounced skip to a steeper, lofted approach, a profile that kept temperatures more evenly distributed. Not everyone agreed with that call. Former astronaut Charlie Camarda publicly compared the decision to the kind of organizational thinking that preceded the Challenger and Columbia shuttle disasters. That is about as harsh a criticism as you can level at NASA. But the agency moved forward, ordered a redesigned shield for Artemis III, and pressed ahead with the mission. Then came more problems. There was an engine swap in April 2025 after a hydraulic leak. There was a liquid hydrogen leak during testing in February 2026. On February 21, 2026, engineers discovered a helium flow blockage caused by a misaligned seal inside the rocket. That forced a full rollback from the launch pad back to the vehicle assembly building. The March launch window was gone. April became the target. Launch day, April 1st, 2026, somehow managed to be even more stressful. 2 hours before the launch window opened, communications between the Eastern Range tracking systems and the rocket's flight termination system went dead. Engineers had to physically retrieve backup hardware from the vehicle assembly building. They even used legacy space shuttle-era equipment, old-school fixes for a next-generation rocket. Then, roughly 52 minutes before the window, a battery temperature sensor on the launch abort system flagged an anomaly. For almost an hour, the entire mission hung in the balance. Was the battery actually overheating, or was the sensor broken? It turned out to be a faulty sensor. Crisis averted. At 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time, the Space Launch System rocket ignited its 4 RS-25 engines and twin solid rocket boosters, generating 8.8 million pounds of thrust. That was 15% more power than the Saturn V rocket that sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon. The ground shook. The sky turned orange. Commander Wiseman keyed his radio and said 5 words that gave the entire planet goosebumps. "We go for all of humanity." The launch was, in the end, shockingly smooth. Over the next several days, the Orion capsule, which the crew had named Integrity, sailed through deep space toward the moon. On the second day, Victor Glover took manual control of the spacecraft and flew proximity operations near the spent upper stage booster. It was part of a planned test to evaluate how Orion handled during close quarters maneuvering. Everything checked out. By day 4, the crew was halfway to the moon and dealing with something a little less heroic: the toilet. A waste management system malfunction created what CNN described as a burning smell inside the capsule. Christina Koch stepped up, troubleshot the system, and got it working again. Not all heroes wear capes. Some carry wrenches in zero gravity. Then came April 6th, Flight Day 6, the day that changed everything. The Orion capsule swept behind the far side of the moon at a closest approach of roughly 4,067 miles above the surface. For about 40 minutes, the spacecraft was completely cut off from Earth. The moon itself blocked all radio signals. Communication with Houston went dark, every data stream cut off, every voice channel silent. Just 4 humans, farther from home than anyone in history, staring at a landscape that no human eyes had ever seen directly. During that pass, the crew witnessed 2 things that no camera or simulation could have prepared them for. First, they watched Earth set. The Earth, that tiny blue marble, slowly sinking below the lunar horizon and disappearing completely. For a brief window of time, they could not see home at all. And second, they observed a total solar eclipse visible only from beyond the far side of the moon. The sun disappearing behind the Earth as seen from lunar distance. Victor Glover later called it the visual highlight of the entire mission. And somewhere during that flyby, Artemis II quietly broke a record that had stood for 56 years. The crew traveled 252,756 miles from Earth, surpassing the mark set by Apollo 13 in 1970 by about 4,100 miles. These 4 people officially became the farthest humans from Earth in the history of our species. But the moment that hit hardest was not a record or a scientific achievement. It was something deeply personal. While orbiting behind the moon, mission specialist Jeremy Hansen made an announcement that nobody outside the crew had known about. He said the crew wished to name a newly observed crater on the lunar far side Carroll after Commander Reid Wiseman's late wife. Hansen's voice broke as he spoke. He described Carroll as a loved one lost from their close-knit astronaut family. He called the crater a bright spot on the moon and asked that it carry her name. All 4 crew members embraced in a zero-gravity group hug. Wiseman wiped tears from his eyes. Back at Mission Control in Houston, Capcom Jenny Gibbons waited 45 seconds before responding. 45 seconds of silence from a room that never goes quiet. When she finally spoke, she simply said, "Integrity and Carroll Crater, loud and clear. Thank you." Wiseman later called it the pinnacle moment of the mission, the point where the 4 of them were, in his words, the most forged and the most bonded. The names will be submitted to the International Astronomical Union for official recognition. And honestly, if the entire mission had ended right there, it would have been enough. But the hardest part was still coming: getting home. April 10th was re-entry day. Everyone watching knew what was at stake. The heat shield, the one with the known design flaw, was about to face its ultimate test. This time, 4 human beings were sitting behind it. At 7:33 p.m. Eastern Time, the Orion capsule separated from the European service module. The heat shield was now exposed and facing forward. 20 minutes later, at 7:53 p.m., Integrity hit the atmospheric interface at 400,000 feet, traveling at 24,661 miles per hour. That was roughly 35 times the speed of sound. The exterior of the capsule reached temperatures of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt through most metals on Earth. The crew experienced forces up to 3.9 Gs, nearly 4 times their own body weight, pressing them into their seats. For 6 minutes, superheated plasma surrounded the capsule and blocked all radio signals. Another blackout. Flight Director Rick Henfling had framed the stakes earlier that day with brutal clarity. 13 minutes of things that have to go right. Every single one of them went right. Parachutes deployed at 22,000 feet. The 3 massive main parachutes opened at 6,000 feet, slowing Orion from 300 miles per hour down to 17 miles per hour. At 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time, the capsule hit the waters of the Pacific Ocean roughly 40 miles off the coast of San Diego. Commander Wiseman radioed Houston and said what a journey it had been. "We are stable. 4 green crew members." Christina Koch was the first to emerge from the capsule. All 4 astronauts walked out under their own power. Wheelchairs had been standing by just in case. They weren't needed. The recovery ship USS John P. Murtha extracted the crew within 2 hours. A diver immediately photographed the heat shield from below. Initial inspection showed some expected surface wear and minor cracking, but the shield performed within acceptable parameters under the modified trajectory. A fully redesigned heat shield with improved coating is already being manufactured for the next mission. The world was watching. Over 18 million television viewers tuned in across the major networks. NASA's YouTube channel peaked at nearly 4 million simultaneous viewers. Streaming platforms including Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Apple TV carried the splashdown live. More than 10 million concurrent viewers watched across streaming platforms alone, making it the most watched launch event in NASA's history. One of the most moving moments came from a voice that could no longer speak for itself. Before the mission, NASA had recorded a wake-up message from Apollo 13 Commander Jim Lovell, who passed away in August 2025. His recorded words greeted the Artemis crew during the mission. "Welcome to my old neighborhood. It is a historic day." The crew also carried Apollo 8's silk patch that had traveled to the moon with Lovell in 1968. Old space and new space connected across generations. Victor Glover delivered an Easter message from lunar distance on April 5th that consciously echoed Apollo 8's famous Christmas Eve broadcast. But instead of reading from Genesis, Glover spoke about unity and shared humanity, an update of the same sentiment for a new era. So what happens now? Where does Artemis go from here? The short answer is the moon's surface. The longer answer involves some politics, some budget fights, and a restructured mission plan. Artemis III, originally designed as the first crewed lunar landing, has been redesigned under NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman as a low Earth orbit test mission. Think of it as a dress rehearsal. Astronauts will practice docking with commercial lunar landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin without actually going to the moon. That is targeted for mid-2027. Artemis IV is now the mission that will put boots on the lunar surface for the first time since 1972. 2 astronauts are expected to descend to the moon's south pole, a region that scientists believe contains water ice locked in permanently shadowed craters, that is targeted for early 2028. But there are complications. In March 2026, Administrator Jared Isaacman canceled the Lunar Gateway space station that had been planned with European, Japanese, and Canadian partners since 2017. He redirected focus towards surface infrastructure instead. Congress pushed back with billions in Gateway funding through legislation. The tension between a streamlined approach and international commitments is very much unresolved. And then there is the money question. Just 2 days after Artemis II launched, the White House proposed $18.8 billion for NASA's budget for fiscal year 2027. That is a 23% cut from the previous year. While Artemis would still receive $8.5 billion, the science budget would face a 47% reduction. Congress, which had already restored NASA's budget once through bipartisan action, is expected to fight those cuts again. The budget fight is far from settled. The road to staying on the moon, not just visiting it, is going to be messy. Budget battles, political shifts, and technological challenges are all part of the deal. But here is what Artemis II proved. It proved that 53 years of distance can be closed in 10 days. It proved that a heat shield with a known flaw can be managed with smart engineering and calculated risk. It proved that 4 people from different backgrounds, different countries, different life experiences can strap themselves to 8.8 million pounds of thrust and fly farther from home than any human being has ever gone. And it proved that sometimes the most important thing that happens at the moon is not science. It is a group of friends naming a bright spot on the far side after someone they loved and lost. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. We cover space, science, and the stories behind the missions every week. And trust me, you are going to want to be here when Artemis IV puts boots on the moon. The gap is closed. We're going back, and this time we are staying.